Commander Jake Harrison was drinking his morning coffee when the alarm started screaming across the bridge of the UES Vanguard. The sound cut through the quiet hum of the ship like a knife. Lisa Martinez jumped from her seat at the communications console and started working on her screen with fast fingers. The red lights were flashing and everyone on the bridge stopped what they were doing. Jake put down his coffee cup and walked over to Lisa. She was the best communications officer in the human fleet, and if anyone could figure out what was happening, it would be her. The screen showed waves of data that looked like nothing Jake had ever seen before. The patterns were wrong somehow, and the frequency was completely alien. "What do we have, Martinez?" Jake asked while looking at the strange signals on her screen. Lisa shook her head and kept working. "Sir, this is definitely not human. The signal is coming from somewhere in the outer rim sectors. It is weak, but it keeps repeating the same pattern over and over again." She paused and looked up at Jake with worried eyes. "Commander, I think this might be a distress call." Jake felt his stomach drop. In the 3 years since humans had joined the galactic community, they had learned that alien distress calls usually meant something very bad was happening. The galaxy was supposed to be a peaceful place according to the Confederation, but Jake had grown up on Earth where peace was something you had to fight for. "Can you clean it up?" Jake asked. Lisa nodded and started typing commands into her console. The bridge was silent except for the soft beeping of computers and the low hum of the ship engines. Everyone watched as Lisa worked her magic on the alien signal. Slowly, the static began to clear and words started to come through. The voice that came through the speakers was high and scared. It was speaking in the common galactic language, but the words were broken and full of panic. "Help us, please help us, the swarm has come, they are taking everything. Please someone help us." Jake looked around the bridge at his crew. Navigator Pete Johnson was staring at the speakers with his mouth open. Weapons Officer Danny Cole had stopped checking his systems and was listening carefully. Even the normally calm Science Officer Dr. Amy Brooks looked worried. "Martinez, keep working on that signal." "Get me everything you can." Jake walked back to his captain chair and pressed the button to connect to Earth Command. "This is Commander Harrison requesting immediate contact with Admiral Foster." The screen flickered and then showed the face of Admiral Rebecca Foster. She looked tired, which was normal for her these days. Running the human space fleet was not an easy job, especially when you were the new kids in a galaxy full of older and more powerful species. "Jake, what is the situation?" Foster asked without any greeting. "Admiral, we are receiving what appears to be an alien distress call. Multiple voices speaking about something called the swarm. They are asking for help." Foster leaned forward in her chair. "We have been getting similar reports from other human ships in that sector. The Confederation Council called an emergency meeting 2 hours ago, but they have not shared any information with us yet." Jake was not surprised. The Confederation was made up of dozens of alien species who had been in space for thousands of years. They treated humans like children who did not understand how the galaxy really worked. The fact that humans came from what they called a Class 12 death world made most aliens nervous around them. "Admiral, what are our orders?" Jake asked. Foster was quiet for a moment, and Jake could see her thinking. "Jake, I want you to know that the Confederation response has been to issue evacuation orders for the affected sectors. They are pulling back their fleets and telling civilian populations to run." Jake felt anger building in his chest. "They are just going to abandon whoever is calling for help." "That appears to be their plan, yes." Foster looked directly at Jake through the screen. "But that is not our plan. I am authorizing you to deploy the shock fleet. Every human warship in the sector is now under your command." Jake smiled for the first time since the alarm had started. The shock fleet was humanity's answer to galactic emergencies. 12 heavy cruisers, 36 destroyers, and the massive dreadnought UES Leviathan. It was not the biggest fleet in the galaxy, but it was fast, and it was crewed by humans who understood that sometimes you had to fight impossible odds. "Understood, Admiral. What about the Confederation?" Jake asked. Foster smiled back at him. "Let them watch and learn what Deathworlders do when people need help." The connection ended and Jake stood up from his chair. He looked around the bridge at his crew and saw the same determination in their eyes that he felt in his heart. They were humans, and humans did not abandon people who needed help. "Martinez, send a message to all human ships in the sector. Tell them to rendezvous at coordinate 77 Alpha. Maximum burn." Jake sat back down and pressed another button. "Engineering, this is the captain. I need everything you can give me from the engines." The voice of Chief Engineer Ryan Scott came through the speakers. "Captain, the engines are already running at 90%. If we push them harder, we might damage something. Scott, we have people out there who need our help. I do not care if we burn out every engine in the fleet. We are going to get there in time." There was a pause, and then Scott's voice came back stronger. "Understood, Captain. You will have 110% in 5 minutes." Jake looked at the main screen, which now showed a star map with their destination marked in red. It was deep in Confederation space in a sector that humans had never visited before. According to the reports, there were billions of people in that area, and something called the Swarm was attacking them. "Johnson, set course for the Keth system maximum speed," Jake ordered. "Course set, Captain. We will arrive in 18 hours, Pete reported. Jake nodded and stood up again. "Martinez, keep monitoring that distress signal. I want to know everything about what we are flying into. Cole, start preparing weapon systems for combat operations. Brooks, start analyzing everything we know about this swarm." As his crew began working, Jake walked to the front of the bridge and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, people were dying and calling for help. The Confederation might be willing to let them die, but humans were different. Humans came from a world where everything tried to kill them every day, and they had learned that the only way to survive was to fight back and help each other. The UES Vanguard turned toward the weird unknown and accelerated into darkness, carrying the hopes of billions of strangers who had never met a human, but were about to learn what Deathworlders meant by the phrase "never leave anyone behind." Captain Danny Cole stood on the bridge of the UES Thunderbolt and watched as human warships appeared out of hyperspace one by one. Each ship that arrived made him smile a little more because he knew what it meant. The human fleet was coming together for the first time since the war against the pirates in the Outer Rim, and this time they were going to save people instead of just protecting trade routes. The Thunderbolt was a heavy cruiser with enough firepower to level a small moon, but Cole knew that firepower alone would not be enough for whatever they were about to face. The distress signals were getting worse every hour, and the reports from the alien worlds were becoming more desperate. Something called the Harvester Swarm was eating entire planets, and no one seemed to know how to stop it. "Sir, we have 32 ships in formation and more arriving every few minutes," reported Lieutenant Amy Brooks from her position at the sensor station. The UES Leviathan just dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the formation. Cole nodded and looked at the massive dreadnought that was now visible on the main screen. The Leviathan was the pride of the human fleet, and seeing it here meant that Admiral Foster was taking this threat very seriously. The ship was twice the size of any other human vessel, and carried enough weapons to fight an entire alien fleet by itself. "Brooks, open a channel to all ships," Cole ordered. The communication system crackled to life, and Cole could hear dozens of different voices as ship captains checked in with each other. There was excitement in their voices, but also determination. These were people who had grown up on Earth, where survival meant fighting every day against a planet that wanted to kill them. "This is Admiral Foster to all ships," came the voice of the fleet commander through the speakers. "I want all captains to report to the Leviathan for briefing in 1 hour. We are going into unknown territory to face an unknown enemy, and I want everyone to understand what we are dealing with." Cole looked around his bridge at his crew and saw the same expression on every face. They were ready for whatever was coming. Communications Officer Lisa Martinez was monitoring alien transmissions and trying to learn more about the enemy. Weapons Officer Pete Johnson was running diagnostics on every gun and missile system on the ship. Even the normally quiet Science Officer Dr. Jenny Walsh was working hard to analyze the little information they had about the swarm. An hour later, Cole found himself in the main briefing room of the UES Leviathan along with 40 other human ship captains. Admiral Foster stood at the front of the room next to a huge display screen that showed a map of the affected sectors. The red areas on the map were growing larger every few minutes as more worlds went silent. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are facing something that the Confederation has never seen before," Foster began. "The Harvester Swarm appeared 6 days ago in the Zalani system and has been moving from world to world ever since. They strip each planet of all resources and leave behind dead rocks." Captain Helen Murphy of the destroyer UES Falcon raised her hand. "Admiral, what do we know about their technology and tactics?" Foster touched a control and the screen changed to show images that made everyone in the room go quiet. Massive mechanical constructs the size of cities were moving through space like hungry animals. Each one was covered in weapons and surrounded by clouds of smaller machines that looked like metal insects. The Confederation tried to negotiate with them first, Foster continued. The swarm responded by destroying the entire diplomatic fleet. They tried military action next, but their standard tactics failed completely. The aliens fight wars by forming battle lines and exchanging fire at long range. The swarm just overwhelmed them with numbers. Major Ryan Scott from the Leviathan Marine Unit stood up. "Ma'am, what makes us think we can do better than the Confederation fleets?" Foster smiled, and it was not a nice smile. "Because we are not going to fight like the Confederation. We are going to fight like humans." She touched another control, and the screen showed footage of human ships in action during the pirate wars. "We do not form battle lines. We do not follow standard tactics. We adapt and we improvise and we never give up." Cole watched the footage and remembered why other aliens were scared of humans. The video showed human ships diving through asteroid fields and using the rocks as weapons. It showed Marines boarding enemy vessels through holes blown in their hulls. It showed tactics that no military academy would ever teach because they were too dangerous and too crazy. "The Confederation thinks we are primitive because we come from a death world," Foster said.
"They think our weapons are crude and our tactics are reckless."
"They are right about all of that, but they do not understand that those things make us stronger, not weaker." Captain Alex Turner of the UES Storm asked the question that everyone was thinking. "Admiral, how many people are we trying to save?" Foster was quiet for a moment before answering. "Current estimates suggest that 43 billion sentient beings are in the path of the swarm. The Confederation evacuation efforts have managed to move about 2 billion so far." The room went completely silent as everyone realized what those numbers meant. 41 billion people were going to die unless someone stopped the swarm, and the only force moving to help them was a human fleet of 48 ships. "Sir, those odds are impossible," said Captain Martha Wells of the science vessel UES Discovery. Foster looked around the room at all the captains, and her expression was serious but not worried. "Captain Wells, my grandfather once told me that impossible just means no one has figured out how to do it yet. We are humans, and humans specialize in doing impossible things." Cole felt pride building in his chest as he looked around the room at his fellow captains. These were people who understood that sometimes you had to fight even when you could not win, because fighting was the right thing to do. "All ships will depart in 4 hours," Foster announced. "We will jump directly into the combat zone and begin rescue operations immediately. I want every ship loaded with emergency supplies and medical equipment. We are not just going there to fight, we are going there to save lives." As the briefing ended and the captains began returning to their ships, Cole stopped to talk to Captain Murphy. "Helen, what do you think our chances are?" Murphy looked at him and grinned. "Danny, we are flying into the unknown to fight machines that have destroyed every fleet sent against them so far. We are outnumbered about 1,000,000 and we have no idea how their technology works." Cole waited for her to continue. "In other words, this is exactly the kind of fight that humans were born for," she finished. Cole laughed and headed back to his ship, feeling better than he had in months. The human fleet was going to war, and for the first time in galactic history, someone was going to learn what happened when you threatened innocent people while Deathworlders were watching. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Keth system, and immediately every person on every bridge went completely silent. What they saw in front of them was worse than anything Admiral Foster had shown them in the briefings. 2 of the 4 planets in the system were gone, and in their place were hollow metal shells that glowed with a sick orange light. Navigator Pete Johnson aboard the UES Vanguard could not believe what he was seeing. "Commander, those used to be planets with billions of people living on them," he said in a voice that was barely a whisper. Jake Harrison stood at the front of his bridge and watched the massive harvester constructs moving between the remaining 2 planets like sharks circling wounded prey. Each construct was the size of a major city and covered with weapons that looked like they could crack a moon in half. Clouds of smaller machines swarmed around them like angry insects. "Martinez, are you picking up any distress signals from the remaining planets?" Jake asked. Lisa Martinez was working frantically at her console, but she kept shaking her head. "Sir, I am getting very weak transmissions from the 3rd planet, but nothing from the 4th. I think we might be too late for that one." Jake felt anger building in his chest, but he pushed it down. Getting angry would not help the people who were still alive and needed rescue. "All ships, this is Commander Harrison. We are going in fast and hard. Remember, we are here to buy time for evacuations, not to win a war." Captain Helen Murphy aboard the destroyer UES Falcon was the first to move toward the enemy. Her ship was fast and heavily armed, and she knew that speed would be their only advantage against machines this big. This is Captain Murphy beginning attack run on the nearest construct. All weapons are hot and ready. The Falcon screamed toward the closest harvester construct with its engines running at maximum power. The construct was easily 50 times larger than the human destroyer, but Murphy had grown up, fighting hurricanes on Earth, and she knew that sometimes the smaller fighter could win if they were fast enough and crazy enough. "Fire everything we have," Murphy ordered, and the Falcon unleashed every missile and energy weapon it carried. Directly into the side of the construct, the explosions lit up space like a new star being born, and for a moment everyone in the human fleet thought they had won. Then the smoke cleared, and the construct was still there with only minor damage to its outer hull. "Jesus, that thing is built like a fortress," whispered Weapons Officer Danny Cole from his position on the Thunderbolt. But something interesting happened next. The construct turned away from the planet it had been attacking and started moving toward the human fleet. More constructs began changing direction as well, and soon half of the swarm was heading directly toward the 48 human ships. Admiral Foster smiled as she watched this from the bridge of the Leviathan. "Excellent, they are taking the bait. All ships begin evasive maneuvers and keep firing. We need to keep their attention on us and away from the evacuation zones." The battle that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen before. The Confederation fleets fought by forming orderly battle lines and exchanging fire at safe distances. The human fleet fought like a pack of wolves attacking a herd of elephants. They darted in and out of the swarm formations, firing everything they had and then disappearing before the enemy could respond. Captain Alex Turner aboard the UES Storm discovered that human ships had one major advantage over the harvester constructs. "Admiral, the enemy ships are huge, but they turn very slowly. If we stay close and keep moving, they cannot bring their main weapons to bear on us." Turner proved his point by flying his cruiser directly underneath one of the constructs and firing his main guns into what looked like a power coupling. The explosion that followed was much bigger than anyone expected and actually caused visible damage to the enemy ship. "All ships focus fire on power couplings and anything that looks like it might be important," Foster ordered. "We may not be able to destroy these things, but we can definitely hurt them." Dr. Amy Brooks aboard the Vanguard was monitoring the enemy communications, and what she found was very interesting. "Commander, the swarm is trying to adapt to our tactics, but they are having trouble predicting what we will do next." Jake looked at her with interest. "What do you mean, Doctor?" "Sir, their communications show that they are built to fight predictable enemies who follow standard military doctrine. But we keep doing things that their programming says are impossible or suicidal. They cannot figure out how to counter tactics that should not work." Jake smiled and opened a channel to the entire fleet. "All ships, you heard Dr. Brooks. The enemy cannot predict chaos, so let us give them more chaos than they can handle. I want every ship to ignore standard tactics and start improvising. What happened next would be talked about in military academies for the next 100 years. Human ship captains began using tactics that no sane military officer would ever consider. Captain Jenny Walsh flew her science vessel directly through an asteroid field and used the rocks as weapons by pushing them into enemy formations. Captain Martha Wells used her ship mining lasers to cut through enemy hull plating. Captain Ben Roberts actually rammed his damaged destroyer into a construct power core and ejected in an escape pod just before the explosion. The harvester swarm began to show signs of confusion as their neat formations broke apart under the chaotic human attacks. Constructs started firing on each other by mistake when human ships flew between them at the last second. Some constructs actually stopped moving completely as their programming tried to process tactical situations that should not exist. "Admiral, we are getting reports from the third planet," Martinez announced. "The local government says they have successfully evacuated 60% of their population to underground shelters. They are asking how much more time we can give them." Foster looked at the tactical display, which showed that the human fleet had already lost 6 ships, and most of the others were damaged. The swarm was still much larger than the human force, but the enemy was no longer moving toward the planets with the same coordinated efficiency they had shown before. "Tell them we will give them as much time as we can," Foster replied. "All ships continue evasive attacks. We are not trying to win this battle, we are trying to save lives." Captain Murphy pulled her damaged ship away from a construct that had been trying to grab it with mechanical tentacles and noticed something important. Admiral, the constructs are starting to move differently. They are becoming more aggressive but less coordinated. I think we are actually confusing their command structure. Foster realized that Murphy was right. The swarm had been designed to fight organized military forces, but humans were not organized in any way that made sense to alien military thinking. They were fighting like individuals instead of like a fleet, and it was driving the enemy programming crazy. Keep up the pressure, Foster ordered. These machines think they understand warfare, but they have never fought Deathworlders before. Lieutenant Colonel Ben Roberts floated in the vacuum of space wearing his heavy combat armor, and looking at the massive hole his team had just blown in the side of a harvester construct. His marine unit had done something that no other species in the galaxy would even attempt, because most aliens thought fighting in space without a ship was completely insane. All right, Marines, we are going inside this thing to plant explosives in whatever passes for its brain, Roberts said over the communication system built into his armor. Remember, these machines think in patterns, and we are going to show them what chaos looks like up close. The 12 Marines with Roberts were all volunteers who had grown up in the worst parts of Earth, where survival meant being tougher and meaner than anything trying to kill you. They followed Roberts through the hole in the construct hull and immediately found themselves in a maze of mechanical corridors filled with automated defense systems. "Sir, we have movement ahead," reported Sergeant Lisa Martinez as her suit sensors picked up dozens of mechanical defenders moving toward their position. "Looks like spider robots about the size of dogs." Roberts smiled inside his helmet. "Perfect. These machines have probably never seen humans fight hand-to-hand before. Let them come." The spider robots rushed around the corner expecting to find soft aliens who would run away when faced with superior numbers. Instead, they found 12 humans in powered armor who charged directly at them while screaming battle cries that had been passed down from ancient warriors. The robots had no programming for dealing with enemies who attacked with axes and hammers when they had perfectly good guns available. Meanwhile, aboard the science vessel, UES Discovery, Dr. Kevin Hayes was making a discovery that would change everything about how humans fought the swarm. He had been studying the captured robot parts that the Marines had brought back from their boarding actions, and he found something very interesting in their programming. Admiral Foster. "This is Dr. Hayes," he said over the fleet communication system. "I need to speak with you immediately about what we found in these robot brains." Admiral Foster appeared on his screen looking tired, but interested. "What do you have, Doctor?" Hayes held up a piece of robot circuitry that was still sparking from battle damage. "Ma'am, the swarm adaptation protocols are actually their biggest weakness. Every time they encounter a new tactic, they analyze it and create countermeasures, but they assume that the enemy will keep using the same tactic over and over again." Foster leaned forward with interest. "Meaning what exactly?" "Meaning that if we feed them false information about our tactics, we can force them to adapt in ways that actually make them weaker against our real attacks. They are so focused on being efficient that they cannot handle enemies who deliberately choose inefficient solutions." Foster thought about this for a moment and then started smiling. "Doctor, are you telling me that we can win this war by being unpredictable and stupid?" Hayes nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly, Admiral. These machines were designed to fight logical enemies who make smart tactical decisions. But humans from Earth learned to survive by doing whatever worked, even if it was completely crazy." Back inside the Harvester construct, Roberts and his Marines had fought their way to what looked like the central command chamber. The room was filled with massive computers and holographic displays showing the battle happening outside. Roberts could see human ships on the displays looking like tiny dots compared to the enormous swarm formations. "Sergeant Martinez, start planting the explosives," Roberts ordered. "I want enough firepower in here to crack this thing like an egg." As Martinez and the other Marines worked, Roberts noticed something interesting about the computer displays. The swarm was trying to predict where each human ship would move next, but their predictions kept being wrong. The machines would calculate that a ship should retreat and instead it would attack. They would predict a coordinated formation and instead the humans would scatter in 12 different directions. "Sir, we have a problem," reported Private Danny Cole from his position watching the corridor. "About 50 more of those spider robots are heading this way, and they look bigger than the last ones." Roberts looked at the tactical situation and realized they had maybe 5 minutes before the robots reached them, and maybe 10 minutes before the explosives were ready. In a normal military operation, This would be the time to retreat and try again later, but Roberts had not grown up in a normal military. "Marines, we are going to do something that will probably get us all killed," Roberts announced. "When those robots get here, we are going to charge them head-on while screaming as loud as we can. The goal is to confuse their targeting systems long enough for Martinez to finish with the explosives." Private Amy Brooks looked at Roberts through her helmet visor. "Sir, that plan is completely insane." Roberts grinned. "Brooks, we are humans fighting robot spiders inside a giant mechanical nightmare while floating in the vacuum of space. Insane stopped being a problem about an hour ago. When the spider robots reached the command chamber, they found 12 humans running directly at them while making noises that their audio processors could not classify. The robots had been programmed to expect enemies who would take cover and fight tactically, but instead they were facing opponents who seemed determined to get as close as possible to things that were trying to kill them. The battle inside the construct was brutal and chaotic, with humans and robots fighting in zero gravity while dodging floating pieces of destroyed machinery. Roberts personally destroyed 3 spider robots with nothing but an emergency axe and his armored fists before Martinez finally announced that the explosives were ready. "Everyone out right now," Roberts shouted, and the surviving Marines began fighting their way back toward their entry point while the spider robots tried to stop them. They barely made it back to their assault shuttle before the explosives went off and turned the entire central section of the construct into an expanding cloud of metal fragments. The construct immediately stopped moving and its weapons went silent as its command systems died. "Admiral, this is Roberts," he reported as their shuttle flew back toward the fleet. "We have successfully destroyed a harvester construct from the inside. The key is getting to their central computers and hitting them with enough explosives to scramble their programming." Foster looked at the tactical display and saw that the destroyed construct was drifting powerless, while the other swarm units seemed confused about what had happened to it. "Outstanding work, Colonel. How many Marines did we lose?" Roberts checked his casualty reports. "We lost 4 Marines in the fighting, Admiral, but we proved that these things can be killed if you get close enough and hit them hard enough." What Roberts did not mention was that the 4 Marines they lost had died doing things that would have been considered impossible by any other species in the galaxy. They had fought mechanical monsters with hand weapons while floating in space, and they had won through pure determination and refusal to give up. Captain Jenny Walsh aboard the UES Raptor was discovering another way that humans could confuse the swarm. She had started broadcasting human music during her attacks and noticed that it seemed to disrupt enemy coordination in a measurable way. "All ships, this is Captain Walsh," she announced over the fleet channel. "Try broadcasting human music during your attack runs. I am seeing significant disruption in enemy response times when I play heavy metal at maximum volume." The idea of using music as a weapon would have seemed ridiculous to most military commanders, but Admiral Foster had learned to trust human instincts even when they seemed completely crazy. "All ships begin broadcasting human music during combat operations," Foster ordered. "If it confuses the enemy, then it gives us an advantage." Soon the entire battle zone was filled with the sounds of human war songs and death metal as 42 surviving ships continued their chaotic attacks against the swarm. The enemy formations became even more disorganized as their communication systems tried to filter out what they assumed was some kind of psychological warfare tactic. The humans were winning, not because they had better weapons or more ships, but because they were fighting in ways that made no sense to an enemy, designed to counter logical military tactics. The final battle began above the planet New Centauri, where 4 billion people waited in underground shelters while the last major harvester force prepared to strip their world bare. Admiral Foster stood on the bridge of the UES Leviathan and looked at the tactical display showing what remained of the human fleet against the largest concentration of swarm constructs they had faced yet. Only 31 human ships remained operational, and most of those were damaged from the fighting in other systems. The enemy had over 200 massive constructs plus thousands of smaller attack units. But Foster was not worried because she had learned something important about fighting impossible odds. Sometimes the best way to win was to do something so crazy that the enemy could not predict it. "All ships, this is Admiral Foster," she announced over the fleet communication system. "We are going to end this war today, but we are going to do it the human way. I want every ship to target the largest construct in the center of their formation, and I want everyone to hit it at the same time. Captain Helen Murphy aboard the badly damaged UES Falcon looked at her tactical officer with surprise. "Ma'am, that construct is the size of a small moon, and it has enough firepower to destroy our entire fleet. Attacking it directly would be suicide." Foster smiled as she heard similar comments from other ship captains over the communication channel. "Captain Murphy, you are absolutely right, which is exactly why we are going to do it. The swarm expects us to attack their weak points and avoid their strong ones, so we are going to do the opposite." The human fleet began moving toward the center of the swarm formation, where the largest construct waited like a mechanical mountain covered in weapons. Every tactical computer in the fleet was screaming warnings about how dangerous this plan was, but the humans ignored their computers because they had learned to trust their instincts over logic. Captain Tom Edwards aboard the heavy cruiser UES Defiant was the first to reach weapons range of the massive construct and immediately opened fire with everything his ship carried. The explosions against the enemy hull looked like tiny sparks against a dark mountain, but Edwards kept firing because that was what humans did when faced with impossible enemies. "This is Edwards to all ships," he called out as his weapons overheated from continuous firing. "I am taking heavy damage, but the big one is starting to show structural weakness near its main power core. Keep hitting that spot." The other human ships dove toward the construct like angry wasps attacking a giant, and the space around New Centauri became filled with explosions and weapons fire. The swarm had expected the humans to scatter and attack multiple targets, but instead, they were concentrating everything on one construct, and it was causing massive confusion in the enemy formation. Dr. Kevin Hayes aboard the UES Discovery was monitoring swarm communications, and what he heard made him smile. "Admiral, the enemy command structure is completely confused. They are sending contradictory orders to their units because they cannot understand why we are attacking their strongest position instead of running away." Foster watched as the massive construct began to list to one side as human weapons found weak points in its armor and exploited them with typical human determination. "Dr. Hayes, our ancestors used to hunt animals 10 times their size by working together and never giving up. Some things never change, Captain." Danny Cole aboard the UES Thunderbolt had positioned his ship directly under the construct main hull and was firing his weapons straight up into what looked like a ventilation system. "All ships, I think I found something important down here. There are massive energy readings coming from this section." Before anyone could respond, Cole's ship was caught by a mechanical arm that extended from the construct hull and began crushing his vessel like a giant hand. Instead of trying to escape, Cole did something that would be remembered for the rest of human history. "This is Cole to all ships. I am going to ram my ship into this thing power core. Tell my family that I died doing something that mattered." Cole activated his ship's self-destruct sequence and flew the Thunderbolt directly into the construct main reactor. Explosion that followed lit up the entire system like a new star, and when the light faded, the massive construct was breaking apart in slow motion. Pieces of metal the size of cities began drifting away from each other as the enemy flagship died in space. The effect on the rest of the swarm was immediate and dramatic. Without their central command unit, the other constructs began attacking each other and flying in random directions as their coordination completely collapsed. Some constructs simply stopped moving as their programming tried to process a situation that should not exist. "All ships press the attack while they are confused," Foster ordered. "This is our chance to finish them." The remaining human ships charged into the disorganized swarm formation and began destroying constructs that were too confused to fight back effectively. Captain Jenny Walsh used her ship mining lasers to cut enemy vessels in half. Captain Alex Turner rammed his damaged destroyer into a construct control center. Captain Lisa Martinez coordinated her ship weapons with 2 other vessels to create a crossfire that no enemy could survive. The battle lasted 6 more hours, but the outcome was never in doubt after the destruction of the command construct. One by one, the harvester units were destroyed or disabled, until only scattered groups remained, and those were hunted down by human ships that refused to let any enemy escape. When the last swarm construct was destroyed, Admiral Foster opened a communication channel to the planet below. "New Centauri, this is Admiral Foster of the human fleet. The swarm has been eliminated from your system. You can begin bringing your people back to the surface." The response from the planet was immediate and emotional. "Admiral Foster, this is President Thex of New Centauri. Our people owe you a debt that can never be repaid. We watched the battle from our shelters and we saw your ships sacrifice themselves to save people they had never met. 6 months later, Jake, Harrison stood on the bridge of the rebuilt UES Vanguard as it patrolled the sectors that had been devastated by the swarm. The galaxy was a different place now, and humans were no longer considered the primitive newcomers who came from a dangerous world. Ambassador Patricia Lee had been appointed as the first human representative to the Confederation Council with authority over all military operations in the event of future emergencies. Human military advisors were working with every major species to teach them the Deathworld principles of adaptability and never giving up when people needed help. The Confederation had learned that sometimes the best response to an impossible situation was to find people who specialized in doing impossible things. They had learned that Deathworlders fought differently not because they were primitive, but because they understood that survival sometimes meant choosing the option that looked like suicide. Commander, we are receiving a distress call from the Rigel sector, reported Communications Officer Amy Brooks. From her station, Jake looked at his crew and saw the same expression on every face that had been there during the swarm war. They were ready to help whoever needed them because that was what humans did. Brooks signaled the fleet and set course for Rigel maximum speed. Jake ordered, "It looks like someone else needs to learn what Deathworlders do when people call for help." The UES Vanguard turned toward the stars and accelerated into the unknown, carrying the hopes of people who understood that in a galaxy full of dangers, the best thing you could have on your side was someone who came from a world where everything tried to kill you every day and who had learned that the only way to survive was to fight back and never abandon anyone who needed help. The legend of the human response to the Harvester Swarm would be told for thousands of years as the day when the galaxy learned that Deathworlders did not just survive impossible odds, they made impossible odds afraid of them.